And so, United States Senator Tim Scott, Republican from the state of South Carolina, he is the longest serving black U.S. senator in the history of the country. He is...
My brother gave me a standing ovation. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, yeah,
bring your own family if you want a standing ovation in some rooms, okay? Thank you very much. My nephew, however, did not stand, so I buy you dinner so often you should stand before my brother stands, but I'll deal with Dr. Scott later. Please continue.
Well, see, this is just not going to work.
Yes.
See how he is? He's phenomenal. No, this is fantastic. You're phenomenal, man.
I got to have a good time somewhere.
Oh, we all do. We all do.
Yes, sir.
Next, you are the very first black United States senator to chair a standing committee, and not just a standing committee, banking, housing, and urban development, the very first in the history of this country.
Praise God.
You are the very first black person to serve. Sit down.
I don't get this every day, y'all.
No, he doesn't. I promise you, he doesn't get this from me.
Can't take your time, please.
I'm going to take my time,
Thank you, brother.
He is the very first black person to serve in both Congress and the United States Senate. He is the first black person to chair the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. He's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. But not only about you, but what you've done. You hired the very first black chief of staff in the history of the United States Senate, Democrat or Republican, very first one. You had the very first tandem of chief of staff and deputy chief of staff that were black in the United States Senate. And so when people question your blackness, I'm just making sure that I'm reading out all of this stuff right. Tell me when I'm telling a lie. And so, you know, you've done a lot, and you have the most diverse staff in the United States Senate. All those things you've done, and that's why I say you are black history, and we appreciate everything that you've done, and you know I do. Yes, and so thank you so much, Senator.
I appreciate that.
Senator Tim Scott.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Very kind. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you. I will say, Walter, wow. I really appreciate that more than I can tell you. Two things I'll say, and we'll get into the conversation. I think, James, it'll be very important for us to have a serious conversation about longevity is not a fair measurement. A lot of people who have come before me had to go through the kind of misery I do not understand. And the fact of the matter is that we sit here in our beautiful suits, wonderful dresses, standing on the shoulders of people, including my mama, who could not drink from a water fountain when she was growing up, could not go to a hotel or a restaurant, lay their head on a bed, couldn't swim in pools, having the KKK walk through our streets in the 1980s, not being able to get a job in the 1990s at a county that I became the chairman of the county council. Black history is so important that we ought not ever celebrate it 1 month a year. We should celebrate it every single day of the year. And if you do not, that's on you. And we all should not have the same definition of success and progress. We should all see it through the prism of our own experiences. But we should have a collective definition that moving forward as a people is a necessary component to figure out how far we've come, is to take a look back at how far back we were. But if that's the only measurement of black history, we have failed to understand the incredible blessing of being born when we were born, whenever those of us in this room were born. And so for me, the measure of success doesn't start with how long I've served. It really should be about how much have I done. Because longevity is wonderful, but if you have done nothing with your years in service, please take a seat. That to me is a measure of real success. And that's why I thank God I'm the longest serving, the first blah, blah, blah. But I'm more proud of the fact that when it came to addressing the heirs property quagmire pit that stopped black farmers from being able to get a farm number so they could be a part of the farm process of the United States of America, that I sponsored the legislation and fixed that problem.
And I helped you on that.
Yes, you did. Yes. By the way, whatever I say next, just know he helped me on that too. Thank God we in the federal building, he can't take up an offering, but let me just tell you, Jesse, he helped me on that too, okay? But when it came to dealing with the New York Times and I do not have a healthy, wonderful relationship. If you ever read about me in the New York Times, it's not necessarily positive. But the one thing they had said about me that was positive was the fact that we had failed 200 times in 100 years to get the lynching legislation into law. And shocking to me, they said the only thing that's changed is we have people on both sides, Tim Scott, fighting for these issues. When it came to criminal justice reform and making up for the atrocity that was well-intended in the 1990s, but locked a lot of black folks up, specifically black men, because we were mad at them, not because they were a danger to our society. Passing criminal justice reform in 2018, that's the kind of success. The Opportunity Zone legislation is the kind of success that brings more money into black communities without gentrifying those black communities. That's the kind of success we should celebrate when it comes to looking at things like lowering the unemployment rate in our community to the lowest in the history of our country. That's the kind of success we should be talking about. When it comes to funding HBCUs at the highest level in the history of the country, that's the kind of success that longevity may say. Let's take a break from longevity and focus our attention on the numbers. And so if I had more time, and you told me I only had about 45 more minutes, but I'm just joking. Okay. He looked mad about that too, by the way. I'm gonna go over here and talk to this table because you got to come home sooner or later. So, nevertheless, if we want to measure longevity, let's take the time to measure the quality of the service that I know I do not get a lot of credit for it, because I came to Washington with the assumption, a false marketing assumption, that if you don't care who gets the credit, you can get anything done. Now, I've gotten a lot done by not taking a lot of credit, but it has cost me dearly for those, and many in this room, who have a skeptical perspective, skeptical view of who I am. But in the end, I'm fortunate to serve a God who's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In Matthew 25:21, well done, my good and faithful servant, will be the measure of this man when I get there. Until then,
Sir,
we'll do the best we can with what we got to operate with. So I'll spend no more time on the past, but I would love to talk about the future, because I believe that the future could unfold in the most spectacular way ever if we are able to harness the opportunity in front of us. And anyone who believes that opportunity ought not come with headwinds, I don't know where you live, but it ain't reality. Every opportunity comes with headwinds, and I'll simply state this, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. I'm a huge fan, many of y'all don't know me, most of y'all don't know me, of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it radically transformed my life growing up in a single-parent household, mired in poverty, trying to figure out what my dad thought about me because he wasn't around. And I found my Heavenly Father in the gospel. And one of the most important scriptures for people like me who had low self-esteem, who failed out of high school. Man, some of y'all heard this joke before. I failed civics, which is the study of politics. I failed world geography, and then I failed Spanish and English, all in the same year. So you fail Spanish and English, no one calls you bilingual. They call you bi-ignorant. You can't speak an English language. That's where I found my unhappy self. Some people suffer permanently from what Numbers 13:33 says, the grasshopper syndrome. That when you look in the mirror, you've had so much pain, so much misery for so long, you can't imagine it any other way. And so when you hear that there are giants in the land and there's a land of milk and honey and they happen to be the same place, it is hard to muster the strength to move into that promised land because you have more focus on the giants than you do the milk and the honey. And if we are to overcome the obstacles in our way, it won't be red or blue. It won't be black or white. It will be green. And so, to the extent that we are willing to embrace and engage in a serious, meaningful dialogue around green, we should be agnostic about red and blue. But we should be very critical about those who show up to help us while we help ourselves. And if we don't do that, then we are part of the problem going forward.
Senator,
yes,
let's
sir.
jump on in here because there are a couple of things we're going to cover. And you alluded to this a little bit, but again, not everybody's known you as long as I have. Not everybody supported you as long as some of the people in this room.
I would suspect the vast majority had supported me as much as you have. Have I said that he's been supportive of me? Maybe Jesse. Maybe
There
Jesse.
you go. Maybe Jesse.
Okay.
Maybe Jesse. To a lot of black people, you're an enigma. They're trying to figure out who's this Tim Scott guy. Yes. And as my good friend Moses Boyd says, there's a stage and then there's the room. Yes. Tell us who Tim Scott is in the room.
I think the simple answer is if you want to understand my philosophy, I think it isn't who I hire. I can talk about how poverty shaped and framed my worldview. I can talk about how I've said 1,000 times that God made me black on purpose. But I think if you understand my philosophy, my governing philosophy, it is in attracting the best, highest, talented people who represent diverse communities so that I am always getting information from multiple sources. By doing so, it makes me easier or provides me with better perspective to serve the masses. And so my former chief of staff, who's now the head of the NRSC, is the first African-American female to do that job, first African-American female to ever run a presidential campaign as a Republican, and the first African-American to be the female chief of staff in the United States Senate. What I try to do is find people who are incredibly talented. When I found Jennifer, she was literally on the tarmac bringing planes in because she could not find a job in Washington, D.C. because she was not what they were looking for. I'm not sure what they were looking for because she also was a University of Michigan graduate from the law school, but couldn't get a job here. And I always look for people who are talented, but they don't quite fit the mold. And she was a single mother like the one that raised me, and she was a tough as nails single mama and a prosecutor. I said, she knows something I don't know. I'm a businessman, not a lawyer. And she made a great compliment to my skill set. My deputy chief of staff, African-American female, Alyssa, was a Harvard grad. She grew up on third base, you know. So it was good to see that there is no homogenous group of thinkers called black people. I mean, Jennifer grew up in Colorado and a double wide, basically speaking, very poor person. And Alyssa's father was the superintendent of education for one of the school districts in Columbia, South Carolina. And so having that combination helps me and informs me. But then I also had the first female Hispanic chief of staff after Jennifer left, Neri to my right over there. And so what I try to do is make sure I'm always surrounded by good, smart people who bring a sensitivity for people. Because the one thing I require is that we all are sensitive to people who can't get in this room and put on these suits. Because if the best thing we can do is leave this room and enrich everybody in this room, we are abject failures. My plan always starts at the bottom, but it's going to be based on how to get them up first. I don't buy into the talented 10th concept that it only is those of us at the top who can help those at the bottom. I believe in both the talented 10th and the hardworking other side of the coin, which I think is the master of getting it right, which is taking the two and creating your own hybrid so that we are always populated with the right ideas at the right time. Because if you have 1,000 of them, one of them will be the magic bullet you're looking for, even though there is no such thing as a panacea to what we face.
So let's talk about money.
Sure enough.
Let's do it. So tell us as chair, you are now the chair. Did I say that? The chair, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
The chair of the United States Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Development Committee. What's your vision as it relates to inclusion?
Yes.
Because you've got a room full of folks who look like this.
Yep.
And look like you, actually.
Yes.
What is your vision as it relates to inclusion now that you are the chairman? You're not a ranking member, you're the chairman now.
I think it's incredibly important for us to figure out how to unlock capital for disadvantaged communities. My goal is to set the kind of parameters that allows for $1 trillion of capital to be set free in disadvantaged communities in the next 10 years. I believe we can get to 2 trillion. I believe we can get to 2 trillion. My staff and I, we've been working on this for a long time. They're like, please, when you go out there, just say $1 trillion. Because Lord knows we're going to struggle to get to the trillion. I say, no, I'm going to tell them the truth. We can get to 2 trillion. It's not easy. But think about this. If 41 to 42% of African Americans own their own homes, the average house is $289,000 per house. If you were able to talk about $1 trillion, you could see $700 billion by taking the African American home ownership from 41 to 43% because it ebbs and flows to 47%. That's $700 billion. Now, I did the math on a plane, so you might have to check that later. But literally, that's $750 billion. Well, what does that take? Well, it takes us creating a little more flexibility on the resources that we create for affordable housing. It takes also inclusion, financial inclusion. I worked on legislation a few years ago that the 3 major credit scoring bureaus work on. And it's basically something so simple that they should have been ashamed they weren't doing it already. If a brother pays his rent on time, should it count? But does it count? If you pay your electric bill on time, should it count? But does it count? How about your cell phone bill? This is called common sense. But you talk about financial inclusion, we have to make sure everything that makes you credit worthy is a part of your profile. I didn't get the bill passed, but I did have enough conversations with the 3 bureaus that 2 of them have embraced it and started using it. So I'm going back to the drawing board to embed it in law so that it's permanent. If that alone helps us increase by 1 or 2 points, then the question is, are there other flexibilities that are possible, safe harbor loans, right? So in a world where we have these SIFIs, these significant financial institutions, which allows the regulators to put so much pressure on banks that they don't want to take any risk at all. What does that mean? That means that Tim Scott never started a business then. Because I had to have someone give me a character loan to start my business. You know about this, Milton. Think about this. If we were to pair together home ownership and small businesses by allowing community banks to be able to make easier decisions because the regulatory environment doesn't punish you for taking a chance on someone in your community that you know well, even though those loans perform very well. We're talking about accessing billions and billions of dollars, James, at First Citizens. That would be a massive restructuring of the way that we do business in America. And then what if we took the definition of a community bank from 3 billion to 25 billion, so we're talking about more access to more credit along the way? It's not been indexed ever. Those 2 things, housing and small businesses, transforms the minority communities and disadvantaged communities all across America. And let me say this as well. God made me black on purpose, but he made sure that the people who sowed into my life were black, white, Hispanics, and Asians. My goal is to make sure that everyone who is struggling with a K, struggling. Y'all, sorry, that's just where I'm from North Charleston. This is how we do it. My staff's over there. KJ, you know that. Yes, has an opportunity to access more resources. That's called the American way, or at least it's supposed to be the American way. And I aim to make sure that from a banking perspective, we have the flexibility with our regulators so that small business owners with a good plan, with decent credit, has access to the capital to start hiring people from their own communities. Because when I started my business, it's exactly what I did. I took an Allstate insurance agency and I crafted 3 other Allstate agencies out of my one Allstate agency, with 2 of them being African Americans. How do you do that? You just do the right thing, but it starts at home in your community. And if you want to see higher employment numbers in your community, you probably have to start a business and make it happen. I'm not waiting for somebody to come rescue me. They ain't coming. They're not coming.
Right. So let's talk about, when we talk about small business, sometimes business stays small because of artificial barriers.
Yes.
So you and I have had this conversation about some of these monopolistic type entities out there, like GPOs.
Yes.
And, you know, there was a bill put out there, bipartisan, to say, hey, let's take away some of the power of this because they're not being inclusive to small business or minority-owned business. And we think about entities like that. You know, big business has the bigger lobby than a small black-owned manufacturing healthcare business. What do we think? What can we do about tearing down some of those barriers?
I think it's the same value proposition that we should be asking ourselves. And I know there's legislation in the House for some stuff and the Senate for different things. But the way I look at it from a philosophical perspective is it's a price versus cost conversation. The government has embraced, and I fought this 6 years ago and still fighting it to this day, the federal government has embraced this concept that the bigger the contract, the lower the price, but it leads to monopolies or duopolies. Therefore, your small businesses are then excluded because they don't have the bonding capacity or the magnitude of business to have access to those contracts. As a result, you have fewer and fewer people participating in federal government contracting. And so initially, and I've always believed this, initially, when you get to a monopoly or a duopoly, the prices go down. Shay taught me this because Shay used to be my finance man. This is the brain behind the Opportunity Zone. It's Shay Hawkins himself, live from Ohio. So when I wrote the Opportunity Zone legislation, I said, what had happened was, and Shay went to work and made it into Opportunity Zones. And behind him is Saudelletti, who followed Shay as the head of my banking portfolio to make sure that I was prepared for the challenges that we had. But if we're going to find a way to break these contracts down, see, initially the price goes down. But long term, if you only have 1 or 2 players, the price goes up. I'm sure I shouldn't say this out loud, but can we say Verizon and Comcast? I mean, at some point, yeah, I should not say that. Yeah, I agree. Good. Listen, if you live in my neighborhood, you only get AT&T for your cable service, and they don't have cable service. That's a problem, right? But the problem is that when you only have one player playing in different tracks, what do you get? You get high prices and low access. So the cost long-term goes up, even though the price short-term goes down. And so if we're going to get back to a value proposition, the value proposition is to make sure that we have as much competition as humanly possible, which means reducing the size of these contracts so more people play. Same is true with GPOs. If you could get a few hospitals together to work on price of drugs and supplies and have more competition, who's going to coordinate that, you're better off. And we have to find a way to do that again. If not, we're going to have these monopolies and duopolies in every sector of our economy that excludes the vast majority of people who want to be competitive in their own home market.
You're exactly right. I've got this question from the audience, then I've got another question.
I didn't know we were taking Questions from the audience.
Yeah. Come on, work with me. Work with me. Just come on and work with me.
I need better staff. You'll be get me out of
Just
here.
work with me. Just work with me.
All right.
So in the U.S., there are 1.2 million minority-owned businesses with paid employees.
Yes.
They generate 1.6 trillion in revenue and employ 9.9 million people. I didn't fact check any of this. This is from the audience.
Sounds
Okay?
good. Sounds like my math.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yes.
What can the federal government do directly and indirectly to promote minority business development?
Well, number one, the thing we just talked about, the value proposition with large contracts in and of itself would encourage and promote more small businesses if we had smaller contracts where people can compete for them, number one. Number two, the fact of the matter is that we need to go back to COVID. We lost 42 to 44% of African-American businesses closed permanently. Permanently. We've not recovered from that, by the way. And so two things that we talked about. One was access to capital, and one of the ways that we need to help small businesses grow is by making sure that we increase the cap that allows for small business and capital formation to happen in your local communities. If we don't do that, we will not be able to get more businesses started. And then we have to also have I'm not sure, Rachel and my staff would probably call it safe harbors or something different, but we have to go back to that community banking concept so that there's more access to credit and capital. If we do that, you can grow more small businesses. That's a major part. I'm a big believer in financial literacy and financial education. If we're not also educating young people, and I'm not talking about the 35-year-old, I'll be 60 this year, 35-year-old.
Welcome to
Welcome to
the club.
the club, man. I hope it's a good club.
It's a great club.
Praise the Lord. Okay, good. On the sensational 60s, I'm looking forward to them now. They're coming in September. Y'all pray for me. So if we're going to open the door of opportunity, what we're going to have to do is make sure that we're educating the fourth grader and the fifth grader and the sixth grader and the seventh grader.
That's right.
That's why part of my $2 trillion bucket includes education. We have done a miserable job as a nation educating kids about free markets and capitalism, about starting your own small business, about investing in the stock market. These aren't concepts that are familiar to the average person. And if the average person doesn't feel like, this makes sense to me, they don't get involved. Members of my staff back here, we once every 3 or 4 months, we'll sit down, I'll bring up my whiteboard, and we'll have a conversation about there are only 3 ways to create a profit in America: business ownership, equity position in the marketplace, and land.
Right. That's right. Real estate.
There aren't any other ways to do it. And if you don't have that conversation with your fourth grader and your fifth grader, when they're 40 trying to figure out how to start the business, they don't do it. And this is what separates America from the rest of the world: risk-taking. Socialism has been tried in our community more than any other place, and it has failed miserably, as it has all over the world for 2 centuries. The one thing we haven't done is had a serious conversation about entrepreneurship in the communities. Tell them I'll call them right back. Literally, we have to be in a position where we're seriously conversing with our youngest kids. Like your daughters, they are smart, they are capable, they are talented, and they are making bank. Can a brother get a loan? She's like, no. She wants to know my credit score over there. My goodness gracious, you taught them really well.
I taught them well.
Yes, you did. Okay.
So let's combine those 2 things for a second. When you think about access to capital,
Yep.
I want to think about small business growth. So you talk about the young people table over there. You got Ross Emery, Frank's son, over there. And he's getting ready to close on a major transaction. Major, I don't mean a $20 or $30 million transaction. I mean real money. That's stuff you and I call real money.
I thought 30 million was real money. I'm from the government. I'm not here to help you, but literally, I thought that was real money. But continue, please. Yes.
And part of his capital is coming from SBIC.
Yes.
And so you and I have had this conversation a lot. There are about roughly 375 or so SBIC licenses out there. And maybe 8 or 9, maybe, are in the hands of folks who look like this, who are out here. How can we take away some of the regulatory barriers and streamline it such that folks get the SBIC license to be able to invest in companies like Ross's? That's just a prime example. I know Della Clark was in here earlier. I don't know if Della's still here. But see, there's Della. There's my girl out of Philadelphia. She has an SBIC license. And when 47 was 45, we worked hard on that because Sam Boyd and Jerron, we worked hard to make sure we were opening the door. What will you do now as chair?
I'm going to say Trump, by the way.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah.
Here's what I'm saying. At the end of the day, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we listen and learn from someone who's already done it, number one, so that we can understand the barriers that need to be eliminated for it to happen, number two. And when we're talking about SBICs, maybe everybody in the room knows what we're talking about, but it's the ability to have a company designated that raises capital from $250,000 to $10 or $15 million, and they are backed, most importantly, by the SBA as a loan guarantee. Now, we do this. This is done not just on the federal level, but it's done on the state level and the local level as well. When I was chairman of county council, we had 3 counties came together, and we would loan up to, our max was, the floor for SBIC is $250. Our max was $250. But we could lend money to help people start businesses, to grow their businesses up to $250,000. So this access to capital is already available on the local level, the state level, and making it more available on the federal level requires removing those burdens and hurdles. And today, during our reception, our new SBA director, Kelly Loeffler, should stop by for a few minutes, and I'm going to ask Walter to have a conversation with her. Walter, will you have a conversation with her about that?
Of course I will. When do I ever refuse to have a conversation with anyone that you ask me to?
Especially about money. So this is good news. This is good. This is good news for America, right?
That's right.
But this is what it takes. I mean, it takes, and this is my point, though. This is really my point. If you're not about red or blue, but you're about green, and you're agnostic about the person bringing the assistance, let us celebrate the people who bring the assistance to you.
That's right.
And when Kelly's there, you have an opportunity to talk to someone who's just getting confirmed as the new SBA. Let's help her prioritize what we believe is in the best interest of the country and us. Because I'm working on behalf of the country.
That's right.
And us. And if we do that, we will have better results. But if we just poke people in the eye and say, help me out, we should not assume that the next 4 years is going to be comfortable for people who believe in poking in the eye.
No.
I'm going to be okay. But I want all of us to be okay, because the vast majority of successful businesses survive Republican and Democrat administrations. We don't. I mean, when I started my business, I didn't look and say who's the president of the United States. I went to a bank to borrow some money, and so at the end of the day, if we have that philosophy, we will be successful. If we don't, we won't.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I know your staff's starting to give me the high sign over here.
I was hoping they would at the audience from reservation, but that didn't help. So let's just take some more questions.
So what are any final thoughts that you would like to leave with this audience, again, as we celebrate back history, as we talk about capital formation and businesses, but this is about green? What would you like this audience to leave this room knowing that Tim Scott is a big fan of?
You know, one of the things I would say to you is to do what I've been doing for at least the last 18 days, and frankly, I do it on and off, as I've been going back and listening to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. I think we miss the point sometimes. If you listen to his powerful messages over and over again, he was hoping and praying, in many ways, and some will disagree with me, for a day like this. He was hoping and praying that somehow, some way, this nation would rise above itself and understand the weight of a Judeo-Christian ethos that said that all men were created equal and should be judged solely on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And with miserable failure after miserable failure after miserable failure after miserable failure after miserable failure, he got up one more time and said it again. He didn't stop because it was uncomfortable. He didn't stop because people, our people, were telling him to stop. He dedicated his life to making what was impossible so normal today that we seem to have lost an appreciation for the absolute misery that was his daily toil. I'd ask us to go back and just listen, but also watch. You can feel the weight on his shoulders. I can sense the misery in his voice, but that's not enough. That's not enough. You should go back, Moses, and remember the conversations you've had with the oldest relative in your family that you knew really well. Mine was my grandfather, a man from Sally, South Carolina, born in 1921, forced out of school at 8 years old, because there was no need in South Carolina for an educated black boy. Never learned to read, never learned to write, but he had a photographic memory. He could build anything. He told me when I was 11 or 12 years old, I could be a victim or I could be victorious, but I couldn't be both. The man who had no access lived long enough to watch me beat Strom Thurmond's son for Congress in the place where the Civil War started. His city. Our relatives have paid too high of a price for us not to see discomfort as a motivating factor for our success. If we find something untenable in 2025, God bless our souls. We should be motivated by discomfort. And anyone who is not assuming that hard times are going to come in this administration and the next, just look at the last one. Because it just doesn't matter. What matters is our ability to persevere. We come from people who are victorious through perseverance. We come from people who literally had to give it all and never enjoy sweet victory. If I can remember the pain and the weight on the shoulders of MLK, and I can remember my grandfather with tears in his eyes as he went to vote for President Obama and Tim Scott. He was sometimes conflicted. And he wasn't able to read, so I had to push the button for him. But think about that, y'all. A man born in 1921 never imagined, never even dreamed of a Barack Obama becoming president. Never dreamed that his own grandson could somehow, some way, in the heart of Dixie, in the birthplace of the Civil War, beat Strom Thurmond's son. If we don't understand that there is something divine about our presence in this place called America, that's on you.